Good morning and welcome to This Week in Civics with the Bill of Rights Institute. Happy, beautiful Monday morning in the spring. My name is Rachel Davison Humphries. I'm Director of Outreach at the Bill of Rights Institute, and this is our weekly live show called This Week in Civics, where we talk about what's going on in civics and history and government and what's happening at the Bill of Rights Institute, all hoping to help you prepare yourself, your students, your children, your grandchildren for what's happening this week in civics. So this week, our episode is focusing on women's work, charity, and civil society. And I have to say, I'm really excited about this episode. It's only about 5 to 10 minutes, just to give you a little taste of some of the resources we have available. But I'm excited because there's this really long history, and I think a really serious misconception about the role of women and the power that they've held in society. So often we hear that all the men thought that women were the weaker sex and that they had no legal power, and that may have been true, or that their legal power was diminished over American history and actually global history. Women have never had as much franchisement, so as much legal and institutional power as they do in this moment. So I'm excited to be a woman living in the 21st century, as opposed to a woman living in the 18th century or a woman living in the 5th century. But this question about the role of women and what political power, what social power they had, has been going on for a really long time. If you're interested in a really, really funny and kind of bizarre example of this, I recommend you look at the ancient Greek play, The Lysistrata, where the women gather to protest the men at war in a very unique way. If you do end up going through and reading that, I'd love to hear about it. But even in the Lysistrata, it's talking about the nature, even without specific legal power, women have always had power. They've always had the power to mobilize, the power to use their social networks to engage towards justice. And I wanted to start with, at the very beginning of the American story, with a quick thought about Abigail Adams. Many of you know that she was an interlocutor with her husband, John Addams. They had this incredible, vibrant, intellectual community in their household that she was very much a part of and very much influenced him. You can see it in their letters. And what's wonderful about that is we have that record. And there's this great quote, which many people know, called "Remember the Ladies," where Abigail Adams is imploring John to make sure that the women are represented in the work he's doing to found the United States. Or to foment the revolution. And she says this, what I want to talk about, so we have a DBQ, which is a document-based question. It's very short. It's called a mini DBQ on our website. It's also in the comments. And she says, not only remember the ladies, but she continues in this really brilliant, beautiful example of the power of women. And she says, remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. And this was on March 31st, 1776. So when we think about whether or not women have had power in American history, again, it may not have been legal power, but there was definite political power and definite social power, as you can see in this mini DBQ. So the story, if we're going to reframe the story that women are everywhere advocating for justice and women are everywhere part of the political process, even though they may not have specific legal power, I want to think about those broader associations, as Alexis de Tocqueville called them, the broader ways in which women had incredible power to influence social norms, institutions, tear down laws, create new ones. A lot of them came from these things called women's clubs. And if you're not familiar with the history of women's clubs, I put a link from the Women's History Museum in the comments so that you can learn more about them. But basically, if you've ever heard of the League of Women Voters or the Women's League, these were the clubs that women would gather together to come up with strategies and gather their political and social power to act, to influence the voting and the voters and the laws. So if I highly recommend Ida B. Wells, Mary McLeod Bethune are incredible examples of how to use different leagues and civil associations. Ida B. Wells, the voting rights and anti-racism activist, Mary McLeod Bethune, also voting rights, but an advocate in her own right. Highly recommend you look those two women up. We have on our website a great resource on Ida B. Wells. Mary McLeod Bethune is a phenomenal advocate that we're building resources on right now. And the big one I want to take a look at, so women who had incredible social power, is one of my personal heroes. Her name is Jane Addams. If you're not familiar with her, she worked in the Chicagoland area, and she built what was called the Hull House. And her whole vision was that a democratic society must be a cooperative society of mutual support. And so she used all of her energy and attention to build a model society in the Hull House and to really uplift those in desperate need in ways that honored and supported their agency. And it was incredible work that she did. She got into federal government. If you're interested in learning more about Jane Addams, we actually have 2 different resources on Jane Addams. You can find them in the comments. So to wrap up, when we're thinking about the role of women, women's work, I think it's really important for us to look at the social institutions that they support, the power that they have. There's a term now called emotional labor, which tries to look at the role that most women play in society, even today, and how that labor, that power, executes itself in creating institutions and social gatherings. Think about how many people you know who've organized social gatherings, and just consider to yourself what the gender distribution is there. And so as we think about women as social change agents, it's important for us to recognize that even without specific legal power, political and social power is always a part of that story, and it's always a part of your story. So thank you for joining us today. I'm so glad you joined us for This Week in Civics. BRI has a ton of other resources coming out. We have a new podcast. It is still Women's History Month. We have a new podcast coming out this week on the 19th Amendment with a scholar, Emily Kirschbaum. We have our Teacher Time webinar tomorrow with Gary and Liz. It's going to be fantastic. It's on agency and voice. And then we also have a scholar talk coming out on the role of the essay on Mr. X during the Cold War, and looking at the role of liberty and security today and then. So my last thought to you is a quote by Jane Addams, and that is that civilization is a method of living, an attitude of equal respect for all men. I, for one, enjoy living in civilization, and I endeavor to have that attitude of equal respect, and work desperately towards that all day, every day. And I invite you into that quest, into my community. If you have any questions or comments or want to hear more or something different, please subscribe in the comments. We're on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter every week with this show, and I look forward to hearing from you. So you take care. Have a good week. Bye-bye.